The stranger rode into Coloma, California, on a February evening in 1868, when the sky hung low and gray with the promise of rain. And Eleanor Walsh was already regretting the decision to leave her door unlocked while she prepared supper. She heard the creak of her gate before she saw him, a tall figure leading a limping horse up the path to her small cabin on the edge of town. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she wiped her flour, dusted hands on her apron, and peered through the window. The man moved slowly, deliberately, as though every step cost him something. His hat sat low on his head, and dust caked his clothes from what must have been days on the trail. Eleanor's late husband had been gone 3 years now, claimed by the influenza that swept through the gold-mining town in the winter of '65. Since then, she had lived alone, taking in mending and washing to keep herself fed and her small home maintained. The community of Coloma had shrunk considerably since the gold rush days, but enough folks remained that she could scrape by. Still, a woman alone had to be cautious. She reached for the rifle by the door, not to aim it necessarily, but to have it close. The knock came soft and uncertain. Not the pounding of someone with ill intentions, she thought. Still, her grip on the rifle remained firm as she opened the door just wide enough to see him properly. Up close, she could make out more details. He was younger than she had first assumed, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-gray, like the sky before a storm, and they held a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I apologize for the intrusion. My horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back, and she is limping something fierce. I saw your light and hoped you might point me toward the livery or a place I could rest her for the night. I can pay." His voice was rough but polite, with an accent she could not quite place. Somewhere east, perhaps. Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly, though she kept the door at its narrow opening. "Livery is closed until morning. Old Mr. Henderson does not keep evening hours anymore." The stranger nodded, accepting this information without complaint. "I understand. Is there perhaps a tree I might shelter under on your property? I would not want to push her further tonight." Eleanor chewed her bottom lip, a habit from childhood that returned when she faced difficult decisions. Every practical bone in her body told her to send him on his way, to point him toward the town proper where the saloon might offer a spot in their stable. But something in his manner, the gentle way he had been leading his horse, the exhaustion etched into the lines of his young face, pulled at her conscience. "There is a lean-to behind my cabin," she heard herself saying. "It is not much, but it will keep your horse dry if the rain comes. I have a little feed I can spare." The relief that washed over his features was so genuine it made her chest tighten. "That is incredibly kind, madam. I am grateful." She watched as he led the horse around back, speaking softly to the animal as he settled her into the small shelter. Eleanor stood in her doorway, battling with herself. She had stew cooking, more than enough for 2. The Christian thing to do would be to offer him a meal. The sensible thing would be to go back inside and bolt her door. She was still standing there, frozen in indecision, when he came back around the corner. "Your horse is settled," she said quickly. "There is a water pump just there." He followed her gesture and nodded. "Thank you, madam, truly." He should have walked away then. She should have gone inside. Instead, they stood there in the gathering dusk, and she found herself saying, "I have stew and biscuits, if you are hungry." The surprise on his face was almost comical. "Madam, I could not impose." "You already imposed by knocking on my door," she said, with more tartness than she intended. "And I made too much, as I always do. I have not gotten used to cooking for one." Something in her voice must have conveyed her story because his expression softened with understanding. "I would be honored to share your meal then, and please, let me offer payment." "Put your money away," Eleanor said, pulling the door wider and stepping back. "Just wash up at the pump first. I will not have trail dust at my table." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his weary face into something almost handsome. "Yes, madam." While he washed, Eleanor busied herself in the kitchen, ladling stew into 2 bowls and pulling the biscuits from where they had been warming by the fire. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the table. What was she doing? She did not know this man. He could be anyone, anything. But when he appeared in her doorway, water droplets still clinging to his freshly scrubbed face, she felt a strange certainty that she had made the right choice. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her usual spot. He removed his hat and hung it carefully on the peg by the door before settling into the chair with a quiet sigh. For a moment neither of them moved, then Eleanor bowed her head. "We say grace in this house." "Of course," he murmured, bowing his own head. She kept it simple, thanking the Lord for the food and asking for traveling mercies for strangers on the road. When she finished, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "I am Eleanor Walsh," she said, picking up her spoon. "Since you are eating at my table, I suppose I should know who you are." "Arthur Preston," he replied. "From Virginia originally, though I have been west for near about 4 years now." "Long way from home," Eleanor observed, breaking open a biscuit and watching the steam rise. "Home is not what it used to be," Arthur said quietly. "After the war, there was not much left worth staying for." She understood that. The war had reached everywhere, touched everyone. Her own husband had been too old to fight, but they had lost neighbors, friends. The country was still stitching itself back together, and some wounds ran too deep for easy healing. They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it was not an uncomfortable quiet. Eleanor found herself sneaking glances at him between bites. He ate with careful manners, not wolfing down his food despite what must have been considerable hunger. There was something dignified about him, even covered in trail dust and clearly exhausted. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Arthur said suddenly. "Thank you does not seem adequate, Mrs. Walsh." "It is just stew," Eleanor said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "It is kindness," Arthur corrected gently. "That is rarer than good stew." Something in his words, or perhaps the way he said them, made Eleanor's heart skip. She busied herself refilling his bowl before he could protest, needing something to do with her hands. "Where are you headed, Mr. Preston?" "North, eventually. I heard there might be work on some of the ranches up in the territory. I have good experience with horses and cattle. But I am in no particular hurry." He paused, studying his bowl. "Truth is, I have been drifting for a while now, looking for a place that feels like it might be worth staying." "And has any place felt that way?" Eleanor asked. He looked up at her then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "I am only just starting to think one might." The moment stretched between them, fragile and unexpected. Eleanor broke eye contact first, flustered in a way she had not felt in years. She was 23 years old, far too young to be a widow, but she had accepted her lot, or thought she had. Now, with this stranger sitting at her table, something long dormant stirred inside her. "The stew really is remarkable," Arthur said, mercifully breaking the tension. "Is that rosemary I taste?" Grateful for the safer topic, Eleanor nodded. "I grow herbs in the garden. Rosemary, thyme, sage when I can keep it alive through the summer heat." "My mother had an herb garden," Arthur said, a distant look crossing his face. "She used to say that good cooking was just knowing which plants God put on earth to make things taste better." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Arthur agreed. "She passed during the war, Sickness took her while my father and I were away fighting." "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. Arthur nodded, accepting her condolence. Loss seems to be the common language these days. Everyone speaks it. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "My husband Thomas died 3 years ago, influenza. Too young, I imagine. He was 38, but yes, too young." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and Eleanor found herself reluctant for the evening to end. She served coffee, and they talked more, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Arthur told her about his work with horses, his travels through Nevada and California. She told him about Coloma, about how the town had been wild and overcrowded during the gold rush days, then emptied out when the easy gold was gone. "But you stayed," Arthur observed. "My husband is buried here," Eleanor said simply. "And it is home. I have a life here, small though it might be." "Small does not mean unimportant," Arthur said. The clock on the mantel chimed 9 and Eleanor started. The evening had flown by. Arthur noticed her reaction and stood immediately. "I have kept you far too long. Thank you again, Mrs. Walsh, for the meal and the kindness." "I will be gone at first light and out of your way." Something in Eleanor's chest tightened at those words. "The livery opens at 7, she said. "Mr. Henderson can see to your horse's shoe." "I will find it, thank you." He collected his hat and moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Walsh, I wonder if I might ask one more favor." "Yes. Might I leave payment for the meal and lodging for my horse? It would ease my conscience considerably." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "Neighbors do not charge neighbors for basic kindness, Mr. Preston." "Then perhaps I might repay the kindness another way. Your front step is coming loose, and I noticed your gate is hanging crooked. If you would allow it, I could fix those things in the morning before I head to the livery." Eleanor knew she should refuse, should let him go on his way and return her life to its quiet routine, but she found herself nodding. "If you insist on repayment, I will not stop you." His smile was warm and genuine. "Then I will see you in the morning, Mrs. Walsh. Sleep well." "You as well, Mr. Preston." She watched from the window as he walked back to the lean-to, probably planning to sleep in the straw near his horse. Her conscience pricked at her. It was going to rain, and the lean-to had gaps in its roof, but she had already been bold enough for one evening. Inviting a stranger for a meal was one thing. Offering him shelter under her roof would set tongues wagging all over town. That night, Eleanor lay in her bed listening to the rain begin, soft patters at first, then a steady drumming. She thought about Arthur Preston, wondered if he was dry enough, if he was warm. She thought about the way he had looked at her across the table, the easy way they had talked. It had been so long since she had felt anything beyond the numbness of routine. Now, as she drifted toward sleep, she felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. The rain continued through the night and was still falling steadily when Eleanor woke at dawn. She dressed quickly and started breakfast, making far more than she needed. If Arthur was still there, if he had not somehow slipped away in the night, she would offer him a meal before he left. It was only decent, she told herself. It had nothing to do with the fact that she had thought about him far too much during the long, dark hours. She was pulling biscuits from the oven when she heard sounds from her front step. Setting down the pan, she wiped her hands and opened the door to find Arthur already at work. He had removed his coat despite the rain, and his shirt was soaked through as he worked on securing the loose board. He looked up at her approach, rain dripping from his hair. "Good morning, Mrs. Walsh. I hope I did not wake you." "You did not, but you are soaked through. Come inside and dry off. I have breakfast ready." Arthur hesitated. "I am all wet. I will drip all over your floor. Then you will drip." "I can mop. Come in before you catch your death." He followed her inside, and she handed him a towel before dishing up eggs and bacon alongside the fresh biscuits. Arthur dried his face and hands, but his clothes remained damp. Eleanor tried not to notice the way his wet shirt clung to his shoulders and chest. It was most improper to notice such things. "I have some of my late husband's clothes," she found herself saying. "They are packed away, but they would fit you well enough. You could change while your own things dry by the fire." Arthur looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Walsh, you have already done so much. And you are fixing my step and my gate so we are even. Please, Mr. Preston, let me do this." He relented, and she fetched a shirt and trousers from the trunk in her bedroom. Her hands trembled slightly as she held Thomas's clothes. She had not opened this trunk in over a year, had not been ready to part with these last pieces of him. But somehow, offering them to Arthur felt right, as though Thomas would have approved. Arthur changed in the small washroom, and when he emerged, Eleanor's breath caught. The clothes fit him well, though he was leaner than Thomas had been. Seeing another man in her husband's shirts should have hurt. Instead, it felt like a strange kind of permission, as though life was telling her it was acceptable to move forward. They ate breakfast together, falling back into the easy conversation of the night before. Arthur told her about a town he had passed through in Nevada, where the whole main street was built on a slant, because no one had bothered to level the ground first. She told him about the time during the gold rush when a prospector had struck color in the creek behind the church, and half the congregation had run out mid-sermon to stake claims. The rain began to let up as they finished eating, and Arthur insisted on completing his work on the gate before heading to the livery. Eleanor watched from the doorway, coffee cup warming her hands as he worked. He moved with confident efficiency, clearly comfortable with tools and manual labor. When he finished, he tested the gate several times, making sure it swung smoothly and latched properly. "That should hold for a good long while," he said, walking back toward her. "Thank you for breakfast and for the loan of the clothes. I will return them once mine are dry." "Keep them," Eleanor said. "I have no use for them and they suit you." Arthur looked like he wanted to argue, but instead just nodded. "You are very generous, Mrs. Walsh." "Eleanor," she said suddenly. "You can call me Eleanor." His expression softened. "Then you should call me Arthur." "Arthur," she repeated, and liked the way his name felt in her mouth. They stood there, neither quite ready to say goodbye, until finally Arthur cleared his throat. "I should get to the livery. The sooner my horse is shoed, the sooner I can be on my way." "Yes, of course," Eleanor said, ignoring the sinking feeling in her stomach. "Safe travels, Arthur." "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." He collected his still damp clothes and his saddle bags, tipped his hat to her, and walked away leading his horse. Eleanor stood in her doorway long after he disappeared around the bend, feeling foolish. He was a drifter, a stranger passing through. She had known him less than a day. There was no reason she should feel this crushing sense of loss, but she did. The day stretched long and empty. Eleanor threw herself into her work, scrubbing floors that did not need scrubbing, mending clothes that had only the tiniest tears. She baked bread, though she had no need for it, kneading the dough with perhaps more vigor than necessary. Anything to keep her mind off the quiet house, the empty chair at her table, the memory of blue-gray eyes watching her with warmth and interest. By evening, she had resigned herself to the reality. Arthur Preston had been a brief, bright moment in her ordinary life. Now he was gone, and she would return to her routine. It was foolish to have hoped for anything different. She was preparing a meager supper when she heard the gate. Her heart leaped despite her best efforts to remain calm. But when she looked out, it was only Sarah Henderson from the general store, carrying a basket. "Evening, Eleanor," Sarah called. "I brought by some thread I thought you might need. That blue you favor came in on the supply wagon." "Come in, Sarah," Eleanor said, mustering a smile. Sarah was a good woman, near Eleanor's own age and one of the few real friends she had in town. Sarah stepped inside and set the basket on the table, then gave Eleanor a long, appraising look. "Something happened. You have a look about you. I have no idea what you mean." "Eleanor Walsh, I have known you for 3 years. You are practically glowing and there is fresh fixed carpentry on your front step. Who was here?" Eleanor felt her cheeks heat. "Just a traveler. His horse threw a shoe yesterday evening and I gave him a meal. He fixed the step and gate in thanks." "That is all. That is all." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "And did this traveler have a name, Arthur Preston? And before you get any ideas, he is long gone. He was headed north for work." Sarah studied her friend's face. "But you wish he was not gone." "It does not matter what I wish," Eleanor said, more sharply than intended. "He was just passing through." "Maybe," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Or maybe not. Tom Henderson said a man came by the livery this morning, young fellow, real polite. Got his horse shoed, then spent near an hour asking questions about Coloma, about what kind of work might be available, about folks in town." Eleanor's heart began to pound. "That proves nothing. Maybe he was just being thorough." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "Tom also said the man seemed particularly interested in knowing if you had any family nearby, if folks looked out for you. He was probably just concerned about leaving a woman alone. That is basic decency, Sarah. It does not mean anything." But even as she said the words, hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird testing its wings. Sarah saw it on her face and smiled knowingly. "Well, I should get back before Tom wonders where I have gotten to. But Eleanor, if this Arthur Preston does come back around, maybe do not be so quick to send him away. You have been alone long enough." After Sarah left, Eleanor could not settle. She tried to read but could not focus on the words. She tried to knit but kept dropping stitches. Finally, she gave up and sat by the window watching the street as dusk fell. It was ridiculous. He was not coming back. Men like Arthur Preston, drifters with restless feet, they did not stay. They moved on, always chasing the next horizon. The sky had gone full dark when she finally admitted defeat and prepared for bed. She was braiding her hair when she heard it. The creak of her gate. Her hands froze. It could be anyone. Sarah coming back. A neighbor needing something. But her heart knew, even before she rushed to the window and saw him standing there in the moonlight, hat in hand. Eleanor was out the door before she could talk herself out of it, her shawl thrown hastily over her nightdress. Arthur stood halfway up the path, looking uncertain in a way he had not before. "Arthur," her voice came out breathless, "is everything all right? Your horse?" "My horse is fine," he said. "She is stabled at the livery. I paid for a week." "A week?" He took a step closer. "Eleanor, I got about 5 miles north of here before I realized I was a damn fool." "What do you mean?" "I mean I have been drifting for 4 years, telling myself I was looking for a place worth staying. And then I shared one meal with you, one evening of conversation, and I knew. This is the place. Not Coloma exactly, though it seems a fine enough town. But here with you, that is where I want to be." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Arthur, you barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are kind even when you are scared. I know you laugh at stories about crooked streets and mid-sermon gold rushes. I know you say grace before meals and grow herbs in your garden, and that you have been alone too long, same as me." He took another step, close enough now that she could see his face clearly in the lamplight spilling from her door. "I know I have no right to come back here and say these things. I have nothing to offer you but a good work ethic and a decent hand with horses. But Eleanor, if there is even the smallest chance you might feel a fraction of what I felt sitting at your table, I had to come back. I had to try." "You felt something," Eleanor whispered. From one meal," Arthur confirmed. "And I think you did too." Tell me I am wrong, and I will apologize for my presumption and leave you be. But tell me I am right, and I promise you, Eleanor Walsh, I will spend every day proving I am worth the chance you took on me." Eleanor's eyes burned with tears. "You are not wrong." The relief that washed over Arthur's face was luminous. "Then may I court you properly? May I stay in Coloma and find work and call on you like a decent man should?" "Yes," Eleanor said, and then she was laughing through her tears. "Yes, Arthur Preston, you may." He smiled, that transforming smile that made him handsome, and carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached for her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle but sure. "I should let you get your sleep," he said softly, "but may I see you tomorrow?" "You may see me tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that." "Good," Arthur said, "because I plan to." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles, then released her and stepped back. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Arthur." She watched him walk away toward town, where he had presumably taken a room at the boarding house. When he reached the gate, he turned back and waved, and she waved in return. Then she went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, her heart racing. Sarah Henderson had been right. She had been alone long enough. The next weeks unfolded like a dream. Arthur found work at the livery, proving himself invaluable with his skill in handling horses. Old Mr. Henderson, who had been managing alone since his son had moved to Sacramento, was grateful for the help and offered Arthur fair wages and a room in the loft above the stable. True to his word, Arthur courted Eleanor properly. He called on her in the evenings, always respectful, always mindful of her reputation. They took walks through town and along the creek where gold had once been plentiful. They attended church together on Sundays, enduring the curious looks and whispered speculation with good humor. Arthur met Eleanor's friends and neighbors, winning them over with his quiet manners and obvious devotion to Eleanor. He fixed things around her property without being asked, taking pride in maintaining her home. When Eleanor protested that he was doing too much, Arthur just smiled and said, "I am investing in my future if you will have me." And Eleanor was beginning to believe she would. She learned more about him with each passing day. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He loved to read and borrowed books from anyone who would lend them. He had a beautiful singing voice and was not shy about using it. He was patient and kind, quick to help anyone who needed it, and absolutely steadfast in his affection for her. For her part, Eleanor bloomed under his attention. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for 3 years receded, replaced by anticipation and joy. She caught herself singing while she worked, smiling for no reason, daydreaming about a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. But she was also afraid. Arthur had been a drifter. What if he got restless? What if Coloma was not enough to hold him? What if she was not enough? She confided these fears to Sarah one afternoon while they were working on a quilt together. Sarah listened patiently, then set down her needle and took Eleanor's hand. "Eleanor, that man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. I have never seen anyone more smitten. But if you are afraid, you need to tell him. A good marriage is built on honesty." That evening, when Arthur came to call, Eleanor asked him to sit with her on the porch. The spring air was mild, and the last light of day painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Arthur settled beside her on the bench he had built and waited patiently for her to speak. "Arthur, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." His expression grew serious. "Of course, anything. You have been drifting for 4 years. What makes you think you can stop? What happens when you get restless again, when staying in one place feels too confining?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "I understand why you would worry about that, and I will be honest with you, Eleanor. The drifting was never about wanting to see new places. It was about running from old pain. After the war, after my mother died and my father drank himself into an early grave, I did not want to stay anywhere, because staying meant feeling things I did not want to feel. It meant admitting I had lost everything that mattered. He turned to face her, taking her hand in his. But you make me want to feel again. You make me want to build something instead of running. I am not going to pretend the restlessness will never come. But if it does, I want to work through it with you, not run from it alone. You are not a stopping point for me, Eleanor. You are the reason to stay. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. I am afraid of caring this much. Thomas died and it nearly broke me. If I let myself love you and something happens, I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen, Arthur said gently, brushing away her tears with his thumb. Life does not work that way, but I can promise I will do everything in my power to stay with you, to build a life with you. And Eleanor, is not the risk of loss worth the certainty of love? She looked at him, this man who had stumbled into her life so unexpectedly, who had stayed when he could have drifted on, and she knew her answer. Yes, she whispered, it is worth it. Arthur smiled, that wonderful transforming smile, and leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Eleanor did not want to pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty, she felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. He was right. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little harder, Arthur rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Eleanor Walsh. I love you too, Arthur Preston. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, talking about their future in concrete terms now. Arthur wanted to save money to buy a piece of land where they could raise horses. Eleanor loved the idea, already imagining a larger garden, maybe chickens, a life built together from the ground up. They would marry in the church, with their friends as witnesses. They would build something lasting and good. 2 months after Arthur had first knocked on Eleanor's door, he asked her to marry him properly. He did it at the creek where gold had once been found, where something more precious had been discovered instead. He had no ring yet, he explained, but he was working on that. What mattered was the question. Eleanor, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of the chance you took on me? Yes, Eleanor said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, Arthur, I will marry you. They set the date for June, giving themselves time to prepare and save money for a simple celebration. Eleanor sewed her own dress with Sarah's help, creating something beautiful in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Arthur worked extra hours at the livery and took on odd jobs around town, determined to start their marriage with a nest egg saved. The week before the wedding, Arthur disappeared for 2 full days. Eleanor tried not to worry, but by the evening of the second day, she was pacing her small cabin, imagining all manner of disasters. What if he had changed his mind? What if he had run after all? But on the 3rd day, he appeared at her door with dust on his clothes and exhaustion on his face, and a small wrapped package in his hands. Where have you been? Eleanor demanded, relief making her sharp. I was worried sick. I know, and I am sorry. But I had to do something, and I needed to do it before the wedding. He held out the package. Open it. With trembling hands, Eleanor unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, with a small diamond set in gold. Arthur, she breathed, how did you? I rode to Sacramento. I wanted to get you a ring, a proper one, before we married. I know it is not large or fancy, but Eleanor, it is real and it is yours, and it comes with all my love and all my promises. Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, the ring box pressed between them. "It is perfect. You are perfect." He held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I am far from perfect, but I am yours." The wedding took place on a Saturday in June, with the whole town invited. Eleanor wore her cream dress and wildflowers in her hair. Arthur wore a new shirt he had bought special for the occasion, and he could not stop smiling. They spoke their vows in the small church with the questionable foundation, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Arthur kissed his bride with such tender joy that several of the ladies in attendance dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, with food shared by all the attendees and music provided by a fiddle player from one of the nearby ranches. As the sun set and the party wound down, Arthur and Eleanor slipped away to the small cabin that was now officially theirs together. Arthur carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, giddy with happiness and the freedom to finally be together without propriety demanding space between them. That night, they learned each other in ways both physical and emotional, joining their lives and their bodies with tenderness and passion. Eleanor had been married before, but this felt entirely new. With Thomas, it had been comfortable and familiar, born of friendship that grew into love. With Arthur, it was fire and intensity, a connection that went soul deep. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Eleanor's head on Arthur's chest, his fingers trailing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" Arthur murmured. "Happier than I knew I could be," Eleanor said honestly. "Are you?" "No regrets about giving up the drifting life. My drifting days are over," Arthur said firmly. "This is where I belong with you, building our life," and build they did. Arthur continued working at the livery while Eleanor took in more mending and washing, both of them saving every penny they could toward their dream of buying land. They found a rhythm together, learning how to be married, how to navigate disagreements and celebrate victories together. Their first real fight came 3 months into their marriage when Eleanor wanted to spend some of their savings on new chickens for the coop Arthur had built, and Arthur wanted to save every cent for land. It was not a terrible fight, but voices were raised and feelings were hurt. Eleanor cried and Arthur stormed out to cool off, but he came back an hour later with wildflowers and an apology. They talked it through, really talked, and reached a compromise. They would get 2 chickens now and put the rest of the money toward land. More importantly, they would always discuss large purchases together. "We are a team now," Arthur said, holding Eleanor close. "We make decisions together. I am sorry I forgot that." "I am sorry I cried," Eleanor said. "You can always cry. I just need to remember to stay and work through it instead of walking away." It was a small moment, but it set the pattern for their marriage. Talk, compromise, stay and work through problems together. They were not perfect, but they were committed. Winter came, and with it their first real challenge as a married couple. A severe storm damaged the livery's roof, and Mr. Henderson, who was in his 70s, fell while trying to repair it. He broke his hip badly, and it became clear he would not be able to continue running the business. His son in Sacramento wanted him to sell the livery and move to the city to be cared for, but Mr. Henderson had built the business from nothing and hated to see it go to strangers. One evening, he called Arthur aside and made him an offer. "You are the best hand with horses I have ever seen, and you are honest and hardworking. I want to sell you the livery, Arthur. I will give you fair terms, payments you can make from the business's income. What do you say?" Arthur was stunned. "Mr. Henderson, that is incredibly generous, but Eleanor and I are saving for land. I do not know if we can take on debt for the livery too. Think about it. Talk to your wife. You have until I am healed up enough to travel." Arthur went home in a daze and laid the offer before Eleanor. They sat at their table, the same table where they had first shared a meal, and tried to decide their future. "It is a good business," Eleanor said slowly, "and you love the work. But it is not the plan. We wanted land, horses of our own, not someone else's business." "Plans can change," Eleanor pointed out, "and if we own the livery, we have steady income. We could still save for land, just a bit more slowly." Arthur studied his wife's face. "What do you want, Eleanor? Really," she thought about it carefully, "I want us to be secure. I want to build something lasting. The livery could be that, and Arthur, it would be ours, our business, our legacy." "Then we will do it," Arthur decided. "We will buy the livery." They shook hands with Mr. Henderson the next day, agreeing to fair terms that would take them years to pay off, but would result in full ownership of a thriving business. It was scary and exciting in equal measure. Mr. Henderson moved to Sacramento to be with his son, and Arthur and Eleanor took over the livery. Eleanor proved to have a good head for business, keeping the books and managing supplies while Arthur handled the horses and the physical work. They made a good team, and the business prospered under their care. A year into their marriage, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Arthur, wanting to be certain before getting his hopes up. When she finally told him, over supper on a Tuesday evening, Arthur's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, then immediately looked worried. "Are you well? Do you need to sit down? Should you be cooking?" Eleanor laughed. "Arthur, I am pregnant, not infirm. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." But she loved his concern, his immediate and fierce protectiveness. Over the following months, as her belly swelled, Arthur treated her like precious glass. He took over the heavier work at the livery, insisted she rest more, and spoke to their unborn child every evening, his hand on her stomach, telling stories about their future together. Eleanor bloomed with pregnancy despite the inevitable discomforts. She had been afraid. She admitted to Arthur one night that she would not be able to have children. She and Thomas had never conceived, and she had assumed the fault was hers. "Maybe it was just meant to be this way," Arthur said softly, his hand gentle on her belly. "Maybe you were meant to have children with me." Their son was born in March of 1870, a late winter baby who came into the world wailing his displeasure at the cold air. They named him Thomas Arthur Preston, honoring both Eleanor's late husband and the father their son would never know. It felt right to Eleanor, this linking of her past and her present, acknowledging that her love for Thomas had been real even as her love for Arthur was profound. Arthur was a natural father, patient and loving, happy to walk the floor with a crying baby or change dirty diapers. He sang to little Tommy, teaching him songs long before the boy could understand the words. Eleanor watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love. Life settled into a new rhythm. The livery continued to prosper, and they were slowly but surely paying down their debt to Mr. Henderson. They had moved into the larger living quarters attached to the livery, giving them more space for their growing family. Eleanor managed the business side while also caring for Tommy, and Arthur handled the physical work. When Tommy was a year old, they learned Eleanor was pregnant again. Their daughter, Sarah Eleanor Preston, was born in the spring of 1871, named for Eleanor's dear friend who had encouraged her to give Arthur a chance. Sarah was a quieter baby than Tommy had been, more content to observe the world with serious blue-gray eyes that were exactly like her father's. "We are blessed," Arthur said one evening, holding Sarah while Tommy played at their feet. "Sometimes I think about that night I knocked on your door, how easily you could have sent me away." "But I did not," Eleanor said, smiling at her husband and their children. "Something told me to give you a chance." "One meal," Arthur marveled. "That is all it took. One meal and I knew my drifting days were over. And now look at us. 2 children, a business, a life. The life I always wanted but never dared to hope for," Arthur said. As the years passed, their family and their business both grew. They had a third child, another son they named James, when Tommy was 5 and Sarah was 3. By then, they had paid off the livery completely and were able to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of town. It was not the large horse ranch Arthur had once dreamed of, but it was theirs, and it was enough. They built a house on the land, a real house with 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Eleanor planted an extensive herb and vegetable garden, and Arthur built a stable for a few horses of their own. They kept the livery in town, hiring help to manage it while they focused on their family and their home. Tommy grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Sarah was quiet but determined, with a way with animals that rivaled her father's. James was the wild one, always into mischief, keeping his parents on their toes. Eleanor and Arthur loved them fiercely, raising them with discipline tempered by affection, teaching them the value of hard work and honest dealing. As the children grew, Eleanor sometimes thought about that February evening in 1868 when a stranger had knocked on her door. She thought about how easily she could have turned him away, how different her life would be now if she had chosen fear over faith. "You ever regret it?" she asked Arthur one evening. They were sitting on their porch, watching the sun set while their children played in the yard. "Staying, I mean. Giving up your freedom." Arthur looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret marrying you, regret our children, our life. Eleanor, my love, I would knock on that door 1,000 times over. You did not take my freedom. You gave me everything that matters." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, content in a way she never thought possible after Thomas died. "I love you, Arthur Preston. And I love you, Eleanor Preston, from one meal to forever." Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their mother had cooked one meal for a drifter, and their father had returned with a ring. It became a family legend, told and retold, especially when Tommy, Sarah, and James brought their own sweethearts home for approval. Tommy was the first to marry, at 22, to a teacher who had moved to Coloma from San Francisco. They gave Eleanor and Arthur their first grandchild, a girl with Eleanor's auburn hair and Arthur's blue-gray eyes. Sarah married at 24, surprising everyone by choosing a quiet rancher from a neighboring town. They built their life on his land, raising both children and horses. James, true to his wild nature, did not settle down until he was nearly 30, finally meeting his match in a sharp-tongued woman who ran the general store and did not put up with his nonsense. Through it all, Eleanor and Arthur remained devoted to each other. They had their struggles, as any couple does. There were lean years when the livery business suffered, years when illness struck the family, times when they disagreed so strongly it seemed they might never find common ground. But they always came back to the foundation they had built in those early days. Talk, compromise, stay and work through problems together. On their 20th anniversary, Arthur took Eleanor back to the cabin where they had first met. It was abandoned now, the owners having moved on years before. They stood in the overgrown yard, remembering. "I was so scared that night," Eleanor said. "A stranger at my door and I almost did not open it." "I was scared too," Arthur admitted. "Scared you would send me away, scared to hope I had finally found something worth staying for." "And now, 20 years later, here we are." "Here we are," Arthur agreed. "And I love you more now than I did then, which I would not have thought possible." He pulled out a small box and handed it to her. Inside was a new ring, more ornate than the simple band he had given her before their wedding, with 3 small diamonds representing their 3 children. "Arthur, it is beautiful," Eleanor breathed. "You deserve beautiful things," Arthur said. "You deserve everything." "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter, Eleanor. Thank you for seeing what I could be." "You were always that man," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "You just needed someone to believe in you." They kissed there in the overgrown yard. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. As they aged, Arthur's dark hair turned silver, and Eleanor's auburn locks faded to a soft white. They moved more slowly, needed more rest, but their love remained constant. They sold the livery eventually, letting Tommy take over the management while they focused on enjoying their grandchildren and their garden and their quiet evenings on the porch. When Arthur was 72 and Eleanor was 70, Arthur had a health scare that reminded them both of their mortality. It was his heart, the doctor said, weakened by a lifetime of hard work. He needed to slow down to rest more. Arthur grumbled about being treated like an invalid, but Eleanor stood firm. "I nearly lost you once to your wandering," she said. "I will not lose you now to stubbornness. You will rest, and you will let our children help, and you will be here with me for as many years as God grants us." Arthur softened at the fierce love in her voice. "Yes, madam, whatever you say." "That is more like it," he recovered, though he never regained his full strength, but it was enough. He could still walk with Eleanor through their garden, could still hold his grandchildren and tell them stories, could still sit on the porch and watch the sunset with the woman who had changed his life with one simple act of kindness. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren, a party that spilled out of their house and across their land. There were 3 generations of Prestons present, all of them there because a widow had opened her door to a stranger, because a drifter had found the courage to come back. "Make a speech, Pa," Tommy called out. Arthur stood, a bit shaky but still commanding respect. He looked around at the gathered family, then at Eleanor beside him, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I am not much for speeches," he began, "but I want you all to know how blessed I feel. 30 years ago, I married the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. She took a chance on me when she had every reason not to. Everything you see here, everyone you see here exists because Eleanor Walsh opened her door one rainy evening and offered a meal to a stranger. So I propose a toast. To Eleanor, the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in all things. Thank you for saying yes." To Eleanor, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Eleanor was crying openly, and Sarah rushed to her side with a handkerchief. "I am fine," Eleanor insisted, laughing through her tears. "I am just happy, so very, very happy." Arthur reached for her hand, brought it to his lips in the same gesture he had used the night he proposed. "Still worth it," he murmured, "just for her." "Always," Eleanor whispered back. "Always worth it." As the years continued to pass, they slowed down more but never lost their connection. They spent their days in quiet companionship, reading together, working in the garden, receiving visits from their growing brood of grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Arthur passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Eleanor was devastated but not destroyed. She had loved him with everything she had, and she had no regrets. They had been given 32 beautiful years together, and she was grateful for every single day. She lived 3 more years without him, cared for by her children, sustained by her memories and her faith. When she died at 75, it was in the house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. At her funeral, Tommy stood to speak. He was in his 50s now, his own children grown, but he remembered his parents' love story with perfect clarity. My mother used to say that the best things in life come from taking chances on people, he told the gathered mourners. She proved it the night she cooked a meal for a stranger. That one act of kindness, that one moment of bravery, created all of this. He gestured to the full church, to his siblings and their families, to the community that had known and loved Eleanor and Arthur Preston. My parents taught us that love is a choice you make every day, that a life well lived is built on small kindnesses and big courage. They showed us what it means to be truly devoted to another person. And they left us all with the knowledge that sometimes one meal, one moment of grace, can change everything. Eleanor and Arthur were buried side by side in the Coloma cemetery, under a large oak tree they had often sat beneath during their courtship. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription. She cooked one meal for the drifter. The cowboy returned with a ring, together forever. Years later, their great-grandchildren would visit the grave and ask about the inscription. And their parents and grandparents would tell them the story of how a widow named Eleanor Walsh had opened her door to a stranger named Arthur Preston on a rainy February evening in 1868, how she had offered him stew and biscuits and kindness, and how he had realized before he had even left town that he had found his home. They would tell about the courtship and the proposal, about the ring Arthur had ridden to Sacramento to buy, about the wedding in the church with the crooked foundation, about the children and grandchildren and the life built on the foundation of one brave choice. And the children would ask, as children always do, if it was a true story. And their elders would smile and say, yes, it was true, every word of it. And the lesson, they would say, was this: never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness, never be afraid to take a chance on someone, and never, ever give up on love, even when it comes knocking at your door in the most unexpected way. The story of Eleanor and Arthur Preston became a family treasure, passed down through generations, a reminder that the best things in life often begin with simple choices made with an open heart. A meal shared with a stranger, a drifter finding the courage to return, a widow brave enough to hope again, a love strong enough to build a legacy that lasted far beyond their years. In Coloma, California, where gold had once drawn people from all over the world, where fortunes had been made and lost, the real treasure had been found in a small cabin on the edge of town, where a woman cooking stew had offered kindness to a weary traveler, and that traveler had offered her his whole heart in return. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about courage and faith, about the way love can find you when you least expect it and change everything in the best possible way. It was a story about how one meal, one moment of grace, one evening of honest conversation can set in motion a future neither person could have imagined. And it was a story that proved, time and time again, that the drifters who find a reason to stay often make the very best husbands, fathers, and partners. Because they know what it is like to search for home, and when they finally find it, they never take it for granted. Eleanor and Arthur's legacy lived on in their descendants, in the values they had instilled, in the love they had modeled. The livery they had built eventually became a museum, preserved as an example of early Coloma businesses. The house they had constructed still stood, occupied now by their great-great-grandchildren, who tended Eleanor's herb garden and sat on Arthur's porch and felt the presence of their ancestors in every corner. The story of the meal and the ring became legend in Coloma, told to tourists and newcomers as an example of the kind of love stories that had been born in the wild days of California's history. It was a reminder that even in rough times and rough places, beauty and grace could flourish, that love could find a way, that one person's kindness could ripple out across generations. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Eleanor and Arthur were together still, their love having transcended the boundaries of mortality, their story continuing to inspire and instruct, a testament to the power of staying, of choosing each other, of building something that lasts. The drifter had found his home. The widow had found her love, and from one simple meal an entire world had been born.